Good morning. My name is Lise Grande, and I am the president of the United States Institute of Peace. It's a very special part of the U.S. federal government. We were created by Congress in 1984 to help mitigate, prevent, and resolve violent conflict abroad. I'm delighted, privileged to be the moderator of the session with such a distinguished panel. We're part of the Prosperity Dialogues, and this particular session is going to be looking at development in MENA and the best way of working toward our shared goals of achieving peace and stability, our shared commitment to prosperity, and to security through development across North Africa and the Mediterranean. Achieving these goals has been significantly impacted by COVID and instability in the global markets, particularly the food and energy markets caused by Russia's war of aggression in Ukraine. During this session, we hope to be looking at a series of issues, including how to attract more and better foreign direct investment. We also hope to look at development partnerships, including China's investment in infrastructure, and Europe and the US's continuing focus on investments that unlock national entrepreneurship. We'll also be touching on debt financing and financial technical assistance, and hopefully we'll share our views on the region's status as a front line in the competition between international powers. We have a wonderful panel, and I'm very honored to introduce our colleagues, starting first with His Excellency Yassin El-Mahdi Walid, who currently serves as the Minister of Knowledge, Economy, Startups, and Micro-Enterprises in Algeria. His Excellency was initially appointed to the post of Minister Delegate in 2020 before being promoted to full minister in 2022. Prior to his work in the government, His Excellency founded several startups, including SSH, a company that specializes in cloud solutions for companies, SmartWays, a startup working on logistics and geolocation, and Bright Solutions, an IT company. I'm very pleased to introduce Mr. Lapo Pistelli, who is the Director of Public Affairs for the Italian energy company ENI. Previously, Mr. Pistelli worked at ENI as the Senior Vice President for Strategic Analysis for Business Development and as the Executive Vice President of International Affairs. Prior to his time at ENI, Mr. Pistelli served as a member of the Italian Parliament and the European Parliament. During this time, he was president of the EU South Africa delegation and a member of the Italian delegation to OSCE.
That's enough.
I had 3 other paragraphs. I'm very pleased to introduce Gelsomina Vigliotti, who is the Vice President of the European Investment Bank, where she focuses on EIB and European Investment Fund cooperation, restructuring, and financing operations in Italy, Malta, Egypt, Israel, Jordan, Lebanon, Libya, Palestine, and Syria. Prior to this position, Ms. Vigliotti served as the Director General of International Financial Relations for Italy's Ministry of Economy and Finance. You're very welcome. And we're very pleased to introduce Tagreed Nafisi, who is the Managing Director of Al Mutatakwa Brokerage and Investment Company in Jordan. She also serves as the President of the Jordan Forum for Business and Professional Women and as a member of the UN Women's Social Advisory and Consulting Group. In 2007, Tagreed was the first woman to be elected to the board of the Amman Stock Exchange. You're very welcome.
Thank you.
For our first set of questions, we would like to start with Your Excellency. And we'd like to look at models for investment in North Africa, highlighting the very special experience that Algeria has had. We'd be very interested in your views on the different approaches of investment to driving development. Some international investment models, as we know, give priority to investment. This is very often associated with China's approach. They focus on the electricity grids, the water grids, the transport grids. Other approaches focus on helping to unlock and accelerate private sector development.
Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to share some general remarks regarding investment in the region, in the MENA region, and especially in Algeria and in North Africa. As you know, Algeria, since the actual government have been moving to reform the economy, to diversify the economy, and to sort of get out of the dependence on hydrocarbons. And we are doing this by putting the human capital in the center of all the reforms. We are doing this also by doing some important legal reforms to attract more investors. For example, Algeria have been voting a new investment law, which hopefully will help more and more foreign investment in Algeria, and which offers the most important guarantees, whether in terms of getting the capital in Algeria or out of Algeria. And we are also putting the freedom of investment in the heart of this new legal framework. Algeria have been also removing the 51 and 49 rule, which hopefully will also encourage a maximum number of investors to come in this important country of the region. As you know, Algeria have been an important energy partner of Europe for decades, and we want to offer much more than just energy for Europe. We want to be a country that offers high added value products. And we are doing this by promoting startups, new technologies, and by investing in a very important way in terms of research and development. Algeria, for example, is currently aiming at reaching the 3% of investment in the research and development from the GDP, which I think will help the current economy and the industry to be more competitive and to offer more added value. We are also reforming other laws, such as the monetary law, to make the capital movement in and out of Algeria more easy. Algeria in the MENA region is also a very important country, although the economic integration between the countries in the MENA region and even in the North African region is still weak. So therefore, I think when you talk about the investment in this region, it cannot be addressed from a regional perspective. I would say it's maybe the best way to analyze the efforts in terms of investment in this region is to look country by country. And when you look at Algeria, I think we have been able to give proofs of our we have been resilient through many economic shocks, whether it is the 2008 economic shock or the current one with the current geopolitical situation. And we are doing, as I said, efforts to go out of the hydrocarbon dependence by, for example, investing in renewable energy, by investing in youth and talents, and by inviting more and more foreign investors to be more actively investing in Algeria. This is actually the second time I'm in the Roma dialogue with, I think, the most represented delegation, which I think can give you a good appreciation of the effort Algeria has been doing to build more integration in the Mediterranean region and to foster the economic exchanges between the north and the south of Mediterranean, because it is our natural area, and we have been a country that is very attached to this very important region of the world. as well as the rest of our African neighborhood. And I think Algeria has been also doing a very important job at keeping the stability of the region, whether it is economic or political or even social.
Excellency, thank you for that very comprehensive, very interesting answer. You said several provocative, interesting things. If you allow me to come back on two of them.
Okay.
You mentioned that integration across the region was difficult. And of course, in other parts of the world, we see very strong regional integration as one of the drivers of creating larger markets. And in fact, driving development overall, not just for one country, but for a neighborhood. And you said, harder in North Africa. So we'd like your reflection on that and on a second point.
Yeah, indeed, the economic integration is different. It's quite different if you compare the North Africa to Europe. But yeah, Algeria have been doing some steady moves in terms of integration, whether it is with the North African countries or with African countries. For example, in the next few days, we will be hosting an important conference which hopefully will help all the African countries to set up institutional instrument to make it easy for startups to grow and to scale up at a regional level. For example, now it is much more harder for a startup that is created in an African country to grow compared to other parts of the world, and especially Europe, where you don't have any geographical barriers, neither also mobility problems, same currency, the same legal framework, the same laws, the same, I would say, economic systems. Africa, it is quite different. In Africa, everyone is talking about the size of the market, but the market itself is really complicated for any companies to approach. And Algeria is doing its best to foster the economic integration with friendly country neighbors like Tunisia, Mali, and Niger, and also with other African countries. But yeah, I think the road to achieve more integration is still very long, and we are at the very beginning of I think, which can be a very long process.
The second question that we wanted to get further insight on, you described a model that included foreign direct investment in your infrastructure, a series of reforms that your government is undertaking to unlock entrepreneurship in the private sector domestically. Do you see these two approaches as easy to manage and coordinate? Do you find that sometimes they conflict with each other? As a leading official in your government, how do you handle those two?
I think this is a real paradigm shift in Algeria, which, let's be frank, the economic model hasn't been very open to the rest of the world in the past years. But now we are being a very much more open country for the investment. I gave a few examples. For example, removing the 51-49 rule, the new investment law, and also the fact that Algeria is recording actually one of the most interesting growth in terms of startups, in terms of money raised by startups, whether it is in the MENA region or also in Africa. So those are, I think, good example of how the Algerian economy is diversifying and how it is currently opening its doors for investors across the world. We want also provide new financial instruments to finance the Algerian economy, which in the past was state-centric. And now we are giving more freedom to the private sector. We have been, for example, changing the commercial law to kind of exit from the classical orthodoxy in terms of company formation. Very recently, we have initiated the new forms of companies in which it is possible to measure the intellectual property and in the capital, which is something I think very interesting when we talk about the knowledge economy, knowledge-based economy. And yeah, I think these are interesting signs of the efforts that have been led by the government to open for foreign investment. Something also very interesting you might consider is that we are doing also quite a good job in terms of gender equality. For example, in terms of startups, we are almost at a gender equality. I mean, the recent statistics or the studies we have been doing in the last 2 years, we had as much female founders as male founders of startups. We are also the first country in the world in terms of female engineers. And in some areas, we have more female engineers than male engineers, which is, I think, something very interesting. We have been also doing an interesting work in terms of youth integration. And I think the fact that there are more and more young people accessing to responsibilities in Algeria is also a good sign. I can give you just as an example, our ministry, the average age is about 29. I'm not saying that I have nothing against old people, but yeah, I think
Thank you.
in some areas the fact that we have young people is a very important thing. And today I think we are witnessing a real paradigm shift in terms of helping young people to access to responsibilities. And I think this is a key point to change the economic model.
Mr. Minister, that's very positive. I remember 35 years ago as a young woman in engineering faculties. I would be one of maybe 2, maybe 3 other women in the entire faculty. So bravo. Wonderful to see this.
Thank you.
Nina, you sit in a very interesting position and have a chance to look at a variety of investment and development approaches. We earlier, as we were introducing this panel, characterized this region as being on the front line in great power global economic competition. We would be very interested from where you sit, how you see these different approaches, the Chinese approach, the way Europe approaches these questions, the way the US does, and what you think is good about these approaches and what you're worried about, what you would caution us against.
Thank you very much, and also thank you very much for inviting to this very interesting panel. Investing in the region, in this part of the world, it's very relevant for many stakeholders, for multilateral development banks, for private investors, and for investors coming from different parts of the world. I mean, if you want that I focus on the difference that I see within the attitude of the different investors towards the area, I think that it's a different attitude that overall we see also in other parts of the world. And if we look back at the past 2 or 3 decades, we have seen, is a very high interest of China, in particular of China in Africa, also in the region, but also in other parts of the world. And we saw that there was it's a quite aggressive posture, and I would say aggressive in terms also of financial offers that were provided to these countries. And on the other side, maybe there was a much less attention on the hosting countries to the conditions which were put under this investment. And what we realized, especially in the least developed countries, that this type of investment could have generated a high debt position in some countries. Not in everyone, but we see that this type of approach to invest in countries without having is a clear strategy can also put the recipient countries in a stressful situation. What we do as a European Investment Bank, as a European investors, and I would like also to say as a G7 investors, because actually this is the discussion about the sustainable investment is something which is very high on the political agenda of the G7, of the European Union. And the approach to invest is an approach which is based on the fundamentals, the economic fundamentals of a country, to see the way in which the investment are part of a strategy, of a plan of the country. It's a mutual partnership, it's a mutual discussion about what are the objectives. But most relevantly, I would say that especially as Europeans, we look very much at the standards under which investment are carried out. It's standards, technical standards, financial standards, human rights standards. And we believe that the value added of investment by institutions like the European Investment Bank, by other MDBs, is that to support countries in implementing investment which have not only a financial return but an economic return, which many times is much more relevant. Within the region, as the European Investment Bank, we invest something like 2 billion per year in North Africa and the MENA region. It's one of the regions which is most relevant for the European Union. It's our neighbors, and it's on the other shore of the Mediterranean. And we see there strong ties, a strong partnership, especially after these incredible 3 years in which the world was affected by pandemic, by energy insecurity, food crisis. And so what geopolitically I think it's also relevant to see is that maybe there will be a shift of movements from from west to east, maybe from north to south, from south to north. And I'm sure that over the future there will be a much heavy attention to the south of the world, but in terms also of generation of energy, not only of fossil energy, but in particular of renewable energy. You may know that as a European Investment Bank, we like to call ourselves the climate bank of the European Union. We adopted a very ambitious policy 3 years ago on energy lending. We do not fund anymore fossil fuels project. And at this time, actually we asked ourselves if there was a contradiction in this high ambition at the moment in which energy security is getting it's a relevant issue, especially in Europe. And we thought that sticking to this target is important, but also economically relevant, since what we think it would be necessary is to accelerate the process for achieving climate neutrality, because on top of the pandemic, of the war, the most challenging objective that the world has is that to achieve soon the climate neutrality. And in that regard, I think that the effort of an institution like the European Investment Bank to push for enhance the investment in renewable, in energy efficiency also, because in the end it's not only relevant to access energy, but also to ensure way to save energy and to use less energy. And now there are a lot of opportunities to save energy. And for instance, in the MENA region, we are very much engaged in the production of renewables, since we know that it's a part of the world where there is huge opportunities in this field. But also we are very active in sectors like, for instance, transportation. You know that, for instance, we are talking about areas where there's a congestion of traffic, and we invest a lot also in railways, in a way to decongest traffic within the region. And if I can also say a word about the regional integration, I think that this is a very important topic. I very much agree with the minister on what are the constraints, for impeding this type of integration. But in the end, at least some phenomena that I'm witnessing these days is that there is some sort of climate diplomacy, which is trying to put together countries which in the past maybe didn't used to work together. And the energy security, the climate challenge is something where we see that there is an increasing partnership between, for instance, Gulf countries, some countries in the MENA, also with Israel, also between Israel and Palestine. For instance, we are working very much there to try to push for investment, joint investment between Israel, Palestine, other countries, other private sectors, because we believe very much that this could be an important driver also for development, but also for peace and stability within the region.
Gelsomina, you said something very interesting when you were talking about, if not an inversion, a perceptible pivot and shift in the balance of the relationship between North and South, with a pivot toward South to North, West to East with a pivot toward East to West. When you look at the energy sector and the massive investments that would be required for a diversification of the sources of European energy toward MENA, and the cost of the investment to ensure that happens, and knowing that heretofore, a significant part of that investment has come from the East, has come from China. How do you see this development? Do you see China as a partner, a competitor, perhaps something else?
You know, when my experience is that when you work within a country, I mean, you have to enter into partnership with the investors who are in the countries, and you know, in the end, the development process is something which is driven by the governments within the countries. So, I firmly believe that in the end, what is important is that if foreign investors go to a country, I mean, there should be someone on the driving seat. And to me, the government is on the driving seat. And, but I mean, for investors like MDBs, like for instance the European Investment Bank, where we go there, and I would like also to recall that the European Investment Bank, our shareholders are the European Union governments, you know. So, you know, we are there also to promote the objectives of the European Union. And if, you know, when we think about China, we think to the Belt and Road projects, which is this worldwide project. We have also in Europe this gateway project, which is the idea to invest in connectivity all around the world. And I said before, you know, offering opportunities which are integrated within an economic and a policy strategy, where in particular, you know, investment are soundly grounded on standards which can be verified, certified, and that in the end, you know, they go in for the benefit of the final beneficiaries. So I think that, you know, this approach can be successful, in particular because there are experiences in countries where we have seen that investment which have not been, you know, really well prepared, in the end they were not successful, and and there is also an increasing awareness also on the Chinese side. I would like to say that you know, we have to go towards a different path of development.
Lapo, you're a leader of one of the largest energy companies in Europe, and the changes in the energy sector since the war in Ukraine have been enormous. Can you help us understand those changes and what the implications are for North Africa?
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I would like to frame very briefly the profile of ENI and what we're doing in that part of the world, because as you know, ENI is an integrated energy company which actually has commercial operation or activities in more than 65 countries in the world, from Mexico to Indonesia, just to give you the sense. But traditionally, since the 60s, Africa has been the core of our portfolio. And actually, we are the largest core energy, I would say, legacy industry there, so oil and gas. And quite recently, in the last 3-4 years, we had, I wouldn't say a dramatic shift, but a big shift in enlarging the portfolio in the Gulf, which is actually part of this conversation now. We were some decades ago only in Iran and Iraq, and now we have relevant investments in the UAE, in Oman, in Bahrain, and in Qatar. So we're there. And I have to say that I would like, if you allow me, to enlarge a little bit the conversation, because usually in the, I would say, boundaries that you can find in all the ministries of foreign affairs, you consider the MENA, so the North Africa and Middle East, as a bunch of countries disconnected from what's happening in the rest of the continent. While we have seen in the last 10 years that every political wave moving in the northern part of Africa has consequences in Sahel and in sub-Saharan Africa. And so we are more inclined in looking at the continent in a holistic way because we're working in all of those countries. Even though we have more Africas, there's no one single Africa. And what we have seen, you mentioned before the COVID pandemic on the one hand, and secondly, the breakout of the war in Ukraine, is having so strong consequences all across the continent. Food crisis, you know, the crops coming from Russia and Ukraine, but also in terms of climate and emissions. You know that during the COVID pandemic, we had the only single year in the last 15 years with less emission globally, but just because of the complete disruption of all global value chain and so on. But because of the two crises together, we are also looking, and I'm very worried about that we are really lagging behind if you consider SDGs number 7 and the target to give access to clean and affordable energy by 2030, not by 2050 being climate neutral, but by 2030 giving access to Africa, basically. And we still have 700 million people with no access to energy in Africa, sub-Saharan Africa. And I'm so sorry to say that given the kind of module to find basic energy, collecting biomasses, in sub-Saharan Africa, this is a slap in the face in terms of women empowerment. Because you know that women in sub-Saharan Africa are spending 4-5 hours a day in collecting biomasses. And not talking about the 400,000 deaths related to diseases, pneumonia, and all that it is implied by collecting and burning biomasses. So I look at the picture from this point of view, which is, allow me to say that, broader. That said, I'd like to say that in terms of the MENA countries, that this part of the world is so relevant to us. In the Med Basin, we have traditionally something like between 45 and 50% of our reserve production and investment. Just to give you a sense, I mean, the Algerian minister knows very well, in the next 4-5 years, we are going to invest in Algeria, only in Algeria, more than $4 billion, only in Algeria. The couple of years after, when we discovered Zohr, offshore Egypt, for 2 years in a row, Eni was the third largest private investor in Africa globally, because that development project was so big, so huge. So, I mean, we are there. We are there, and we are also making, as I told before, relevant investment in the Gulf, UAE leading among all of the others. So, what I would like to put in the conversation, I was anticipating this point to Gelsomina before jumping on stage. I just came back, like many others, from the COP27. And I was positively impressed by the call to action that was written on every wall in Sharm el-Sheikh, that, as you know, was together through implementation. So the magic formula this year has been implementation. Because, you know, when you're working on energy, either traditional energy, oil and gas, from the seismic exploration, production, development, and so on, Or when you're working in renewables, this is not a short-term cycle, it's a long-term cycle. I keep joking by saying usually that when you decide to step into a country, it's like a Catholic marriage with no divorce. You are there for 40 years, unless you have a revolution, a coup d'etat or something like.
Or
So
become a Protestant.
You know, so you need to be rooted. And rooted means not only investing and producing and developing the domestic market, but it's also something that is relevant in terms of human capital training, technology transfer, sustainability in the sense of a relation with local communities and not only with central government is something really big. And when you do this job in this way, you are also actually de-risking your investment because the connection, the friendship, the partnership with the country is so strong that you're not linked to the political cycles, the up and down of what's happening in a single country. But because I'm saying that, why I'm saying that? Because I noticed some assessment after the COP27 that were saying, oh, look, this time we didn't make any new announcement about targets. Energy is a long-term cycle. Either you produce or you invest on infrastructure. So it's quite insane to believe that you can announce new targets year by year. It's a matter of implementation of what you decided before. So the big question mark that I guess Sharm has to discuss about was why we're missing the target? Who is lagging behind? Why is lagging behind? What we need to push behind those who are lagging behind in order to keep the group united. You know, this is the big issue, and I fully agree on that. And on the other hand, we all listened yesterday. I mean, I was very impressed by the opening speech from the president of Niger, who said very clearly, look, guys, we have a number of, I would say, conceptual framework, rhetoric announcement, I'll keep it very low profile, political blah, blah, blah. But when you are here in my position, and I have to say, what can I do to put on the ground, to root what you have announced in my country? How do I get real access to credit? This is my daily business, and I fully agree with him. So my point, and I'll finish by saying that, is no matter for a private investor like we are, I mean, we are doing our job, we are spending billions, we are producing energy, and as the minister knows, in all of the MENA countries, we are doing both jobs. We are giving, we are trying to ensure European energy security, and you know all how Algeria has become, I would say, the key player during the last year for Italy, but I would say for Europe. And in all of these countries, mostly in the Gulf, because technology there is maybe at a better degree, we are working a lot about different technology of industry decarbonization, new sources, new vectors. That means renewables, that means hydrogen, that means hard-to-abate industry and CCUS, so all of the range of technologies. My sense is that what we need to do from the political point of view is to realign in a way the conversation. So energy analysts are saying since a long time ago that in order to win the battle for climate change and for energy security, you have to take into account the energy trilemma. So it's transition, it's security, it's competitiveness and affordability. And in the last 3-4 years, we focused a lot only on transition, forgetting, in a way, energy security and affordability. Because we were thinking that we didn't have any external constraints. You can plan your transition, you are living in a bubble, this is a peaceful world, you don't have geopolitical competition, you don't have energy competition, and then we woke up like that. So it's time to realign the conversation, and if I may suggest something to those who are involved in the financial sector, is please realign also the common grammar among the DFIs, the multilateral banks. Because, I mean, it's not a matter of details. If you look at the lending criteria in World Bank, in IFC, in African Development Bank, in the other regional banks which are far from here, the Asian one, the Inter-American Development Bank, you will see that there are big differences about what is eligible, what is not eligible. Either in terms of sources, no oil, fine, no coal, enemy number one, fine, gas. Gas is in and out, depending on the bank you're working with. What about infrastructures? I mean, you need infrastructure. Are infrastructures eligible to be financed or not? So because we are now living in a real world in which you have to combine together energy security, energy transition, and competitiveness, affordability of the energy, we need a common grammar. We started pushing this point, I mean, since the B20 in Argentina, I would say 4 years ago, and we listen from the people representing all the DFIs that this was a real point. But now we don't see this landing. And so we want to work with the multilateral financial institution, but we do believe that if the politics is going to realign the conversation on the trilemma, also the financial world needs to realign at the same. Then we are there, we are doing our job, and we're involved either in ensuring energy transition and energy security. But let me finish by saying that, go back to the broader picture. Please, let's not forget those 700 million people only in Africa who are not interested concretely in talking about transitions because they don't have anything to transit from. They need access to energy. They're at square number one. So let's not forget that, because while we are focused on 2050 being carbon neutral, we are forgetting the target of 2030, giving access to energy to this enormous part of humanity, of mankind who is outside the bubble of the conversation of energy.
Well said. Lampa, there were two things that I hope you will gently allow us to come back to you on, since you raised them.
Yeah.
So why aren't the international financial institutions adjusting their financing mechanisms for the realities of today? What's stopping them? Second question. You touched very gently on the relationship between national security imperatives and the economic logic that drives the kinds of transitions that you're discussing. In the case of Italy,
Yeah.
is there a situation where the economic priorities of diversifying sources of energy are adjacent to, come in contact with, maybe collide with the national security priority of restricting immigration?
No, I wouldn't say so. So very briefly, how can we help or support or understand the conversation happening in the DFI's world? I mean, usually this kind of banks, but also the EIB is on the same line. They have, twice a year, once a year, a conversation about lending criteria and so on. So what I would like to suggest is not to interfere in the conversation, but at least to align the conversation among the different banks. Because you are on a stage and World Bank is saying, look, are you developing gas infrastructure in sub-Saharan Africa? That's right, because we need gas to boost economic development and give access to big mega cities in Africa. Then you move to Brussels or whatever, in BRD or in other countries, and you say, no. That's terrible, you can't do it. So we need clarity, but I think that also countries which are involved in energy investment need clarity, and not to listen to different songs depending on the different singers. I would like, in a global method, to realign this conversation. Yeah, I know.
I know.
I announced it before. In terms of the Italian debate, now let me. We have, as a country, Italy as a country has a very ambitious plan in terms of climate and energy plan being aligned with the EU target. You all know, at least those who live here in Italy, that Italy has no, I would say, relevant positions in its energy mix in coal, and not because of the international conversation. We decided to quit from coal some years ago, so as ENI, we have never been involved in coal, but there's a small portion, and we made maybe a tough decision twice through a referendum to not being involved in nuke. Even though Enrico Fermi has created the nuclear energy in 1934, and we have been teaching nuclear industry and technology for several decades in this country, but we are not there. So we need to rely on renewables and gas. This is the mix. And the real problem is that it's not only the case of Italy. I would say most of European countries are completely or heavily dependent on foreign supplies in terms of oil and gas, firstly, there is a conversation that keeps saying, look, we are the first in class in terms of renewables. That's true, but renewables in terms of power generation. And people tend to forget that power generation is only the 30% of the global energy, of the primary energy demand. Then you have industry, civil uses, transportations, and others. So if you consider the 35% of renewable being part of the mix, of the power generation, but then you compare with the primary energy demand, that percentage goes to 5%. So you're still depending on 95% of other sources. So the big issue is how you, even in this case, you reconcile the narrative. Last sentence. No issue. We were, very happy and keen in coping with our government and also with the EU Commission, giving ideas, gas saving reduction plan, joint purchasing, a common action vis-a-vis the foreign suppliers. This is our job, and we're doing that. I would like to say it's really could be I would say a watershed that finally the Med Basin is not only an argument for talking about migration and turmoil. That was one of the headlines in Med some years ago. We fully understood that Africa has water southward, water eastward, water westward, and Europe here. And the Med Basin is a small lake. So a part of the destiny of this continent of Europe is linked to Africa. It's time to wake up and to understand that we have to talk about Africa with a positive narrative and not talking only about the problems that are coming from Africa.
Lapo, thank you. Tagreed, with your permission, I'm going to ask Gelsomina to respond to Lapo's touche.
No, actually, we started this conversation with Lapo before starting the panel. So, and rightly so. I said that while I was intervening, is that we asked ourselves, what about our targets? Are these targets still alive in front of a crisis like this? And our answers was yes, since we believe that our value added as a European Investment Bank is that to provide additional resources for investing in renewable, for investing in energy efficiency. If you look at the number which were provided by the European Commission under the Repower EU program, where there is this table, they say that there are investment needed for 300 billion for 2030, and most of them in the first years. The major part of the investments are necessary for energy efficiency, for renewable. On the infrastructure, I think it's 10 billion out of 300. So, and also we strongly believe that we have to invest in the technological processes which can accelerate the transition. So this is a clear choice, and the differences between the multilateral development banks. Multilateral development banks, they have different shareholders. Within the European Investment Bank, we have European shareholders, and there is a fully commitment to be aligned to the Paris Agreement. In other banks, this type of alignment is interpreted differently. We work together. We work together according to our comparative advantages, and I'm pretty sure that governments are very aware of what are the differences and how this institution can work together. Let me just finish by saying about the square one for those countries who do not have access to energy. Paradoxically, to them it would be not easier, but it would be possible for them to leapfrog maybe some stages where we went through, other countries went through. And so if in those countries where there isn't access to energy, if we can start by exploiting the natural resources that can have in terms of clean energy, that would be very, very important, and I think that all the efforts should be there to, to support this type of process.
Agreed. Jordan has been very ambitious, forward-leaning in developing a knowledge-based economy. You've been a leader of an investment firm that focuses on these. What are the characteristics of the knowledge-based economy? What are its advantages? And what are some of the things you're worried about?
First, thank you for having me. My name is Tagreed Nafisi, and I am the founder of Al-Muntaqa Brokerage and Investment Company in Jordan. This company was founded in 2005 from members of Jordan Forum for Business and Professional Women. We were all women on board. And this is the way how to be on board in Jordan. You have to start your own company. And we really survived through the financial crisis in 2008. And we survived the Arabic Spring. We survived also the pandemic. We are one of 45 brokerage companies survived these three crises out of 95. Now, will tell you that how the government didn't interfere to help this very important financial business in Jordan and see half of the industry going down without interfering into the stock market or trying to help these companies. But we survived, everybody was betting that the ladies is going to go out. The ladies is still there. Jordan Forum for Business and Professional Women is a non-profit organization that empower women to be in business. The participation of women in business in Jordan is really one of the lowest in the world, which is really very sad. We in the forum, we really work with the Ministry of Labor, we work with the Social Security, we work with the, with the Parliament. We always go to the Women Committee in the Parliament, and we really achieved a lot of very good achievement for women to be in the business, but the problem really, the private sector doesn't hire women. The private sector, we have very high unemployment for the youth and women. It is 40% of the, we have 22% unemployment, which is 40% only youth and women. And this is really very sad, because when there is a job vacancy, the private sector, they don't employ women, they employ the men. They always think that, she's going to get married and pregnant, and, so we really are, we are really suffering a lot from that. FDI has really decreased sharply in the MENA region. The MENA region, we have the GCC, which you invest in the GCC, you don't invest in Jordan. You have the Levant and the North Africa. So these three different economies. Yes. Like when investments come, they don't come to Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, sometimes in Egypt. North Africa is a different story. But the GCC now attracts a lot of investment. Well, they have the money, they don't need the money. But the countries who have the money, they don't have the investment. But we really think that, the government has to do really bold, reforms to attract investment into the country. First of all, we think improvement, the clarity of and transparency. What we were talking about, transparency is very important. Authorities have wide discretion to determine incentives, who will get the incentives, and what kind of incentives it will get. And this is corruption, and it's everywhere in the world, but it is more like in the poorer countries. I was in Vietnam 20 years after the war is finished. And I was shocked by the prosperity, and the economy was doing very well. The GDP was 9%, and I asked the guy who I was, how did you achieve all of that? He said, we fought, what is it?
Corruption.
Corruption.
I guessed right.
We fought corruption. He said, we fought corruption, and we started with the police force.
Isn't that interesting?
And that's how it worked. He said, it is the most important thing for any country to prosper is to fight corruption. And corruption really in the MENA region, I can talk about it, but you know, it's there. Secondly, you know, I think governments should target investment policy that serves sustainable development. You know, do you know that 27% of the whole MENA region unemployment is the youth? And this is double of the worldwide average. So a decade since the spark of the Arab Spring, the MENA region countries suffered from limited creation of jobs. Youth face idleness and unemployment. And for those who find jobs, informality awaits. Somebody, you know this guy, or you don't know this guy. Few women attempt to enter the world of work at all. Because, you know, the salaries doesn't really attract women to leave her husband and her children and to bring somebody to take care of the house. Salaries, are not good enough in the MENA region that the women will join the workforce. To change this reality, the state must reshape the relationship towards the markets, workers, and women. Investment were concentrated in sectors which has not sufficiently advanced the creation of economic diversification, nor have supported the growth of small and medium enterprise, like real estate and construction, as well as industries. We can see this as well as light industries. We can see this, you know, very obvious really in Egypt. Egypt spent a lot of money in construction, building highways, building high-rising buildings, you see, and unemployment is getting higher and higher because these kind of projects, they don't create employment and jobs. Thirdly, government should target reform to boost competition within the private sectors. MENA economies impose restrictions on foreign investors' entry and operations, particularly in the service sector, such as transport and distribution. This hinders competition in these sectors and hold back potential productivity gains through the economic. You were talking about transportation, you know. They don't want the foreign investors to come and compete with the private sector, but this is not helping the private sector. The private sector has to see the other side, has to see how business is being achieved. But a lot of regulations, and every time they change the regulations to attract investors, and we don't see any change really. And we don't see investors coming to Jordan, to Syria, to Lebanon, to the North Africa. No, you invest in the Nigeria because they have the oil, and the GCC countries also. They're all rich countries. So finally, strengthen good governance to deliver better investment policy. Government should set up proper monitoring and evaluation mechanism of planned reforms to protect and improve transparency and social trust between citizens and their governments. We don't have really trust between the citizens and the government. We don't have trust at all. People always have that in any taxes they want to pay, or they think that the government doesn't deserve that we pay this tax. There is always mistrust. And you know, like I have this brokerage company, and if I do something really illegal, not illegal, like a mistake or something, you know, they come and they investigate as if you are a criminal. There is no trust at all. And I think this is one of the major problems in the MENA region, to build the trust between the government and the private business.
Agreed. We're at the end of our session, but you said something that all of us will remember. You said fundamental to this region is a structural inequality. between countries which God has blessed with resources that can be extracted and generate income both for the country and for the investor, and other countries that don't have those resources. It was a very powerful statement. Thank you for bringing that to our attention. We're at the end of our session today. We would like to thank ISPI. Please join me in showing our appreciation for all of the members of our panel, His Excellency Gelsomina Lapo, and Tigrid. Thank you for being with us.
Dear guests, signore e signori, the section here in Farnese room is finished, but please check out parallel sessions still running in Fernandez and Ruspoli rooms. Thank you.